While the former U.S. ambassador, who's now leading the Open Society Foundation, joins me now via Skype. Patrick, it's a pleasure to be in conversation with you tonight. Later on, we'll be joined by Professor Melissa Steyn from the Wits Center for Diversity Studies. But let's talk about the importance of this moment for the United States before we can draw some of the links to South Africa.
Well, Cathy, thank you so much for having me on in this difficult time for my country and in the world. I appreciate your steady and constant voice on the air. So there are so many things that unite the U.S. and South Africa in our history. As I always said when I served in Southern Africa, regrettably, profound disparities in access to justice is one of them. The murder, the execution of George Floyd on camera after being choked to death really for 9 minutes has galvanized the consciousness of America and has created a solidarity movement that's been taken up all over the globe. It's been remarkable to see demonstrations in Paris, in London, but also outside of the Parliament in Cape Town. This is a moment that has really brought into sharp focus for those who really may not have been aware of the depth of the situation, the kind of depravity that exists in the inhumane treatment that African Americans receive at the hands of law enforcement. So this is a moment, Cathy, where some of us who are in the reform movement hope that we're going to ask some really important questions about how we're policed, why we are over-policed, and what exactly police should be used for. Lastly, Cathy, also a moment where we have a chief executive in the United States, in the White House, who has been fanning the flames of racial violence, who has militarized the response to peaceful demonstrations. Yes, there is a need always to denounce violence and looting, but that's not what this president has done. He's insisted on the military being on the streets of the nation's capital in a way that's unprecedented against people who are exercising their First Amendment rights. Hugely important moment.
One of the questions that, of course, people ask when they look at the scale of protests is whether there have been protests that take place like this in modern American history. You've been an activist for a significant part of your life. When you take a look at your journey, is this something you've seen before?
We haven't seen demonstrations at this widespread a level of intensity in many decades in the U.S. Usually, when we've had some kind of flare-up of tension between police and community or a horrific incident like the one we just saw, the demonstrations are localized. Yes, there'll be some moments of solidarity, but not sustained solidarity. I think there are two things that have happened here, Cathy. One, we're living in a time where cameras are ubiquitous. Everything is being captured, so that brings a kind of credibility to the claims that African Americans have long made about the experiences that we have every single day. And then secondly, because everybody is sheltering in place now because of COVID, it's almost as if we're living in an old news ecosystem from the 20th century where we're all watching the same things at the same times, and that's creating a collective consciousness about this. And then there's an exhaustion, and we've seen time and again these kinds of affronts and hardly any accountability. People have had enough, and they want their public officials to know that, and they're demanding change now.
Now, when we look at some of the problems that exist within the policing structure, but I think they go far beyond that. When we're talking and looking at racism, it's structural, it's systemic. So how does a protest like this move the energy off the streets into ensuring that there is tangible change at the end of the day? Because that's really what's going to change people's lives.
Cathy, you always ask the very best questions. The transition that you're describing, that you're insisting is necessary, is already occurring. This morning we had an announcement from the mayor of Los Angeles that he is going to cut back the budget of the police force in his city, and he will use those resources instead to support reform that will advance the cause being championed on these streets. We're seeing other mayors pick up that same cry. I happened, Cathy, to have worked for a president who launched an initiative called 21st Century Policing. It was funded in our Department of Justice. It was in response to the horrific killing of Michael Brown. There were a number of cities around America that took it up. And then when Donald Trump came in with his attorney general, they cut the program, they defunded it, and they probably put it in the same trash bin that they put our pandemic response in as well. Well, cities are now picking that up. They're brushing it off. They're investing in it. Philanthropists are investing in it. And we're going to have a new mode of accountability around that. Cathy, I also want to say that this is a moment for all of us to share the best practices from around the world and to learn from one another. While I have concern about what's happened in the U.S., I'm also concerned about what's happened with innocents like Colin Scosa in South Africa, who had the military and police forces come into his home, claimed that he was violating social distancing, and they killed this poor man. There are 230,000 South Africans who have been arrested for social distancing violations. That's an outrage. It subverts the Constitution in South Africa in much the same ways that we're seeing a subversion of constitutional norms in the United States. Let's learn from one another. Let's do better, and let's move affirmatively from our toxic past.
Sure, and we'll talk in a moment about how some of those lessons can be shared and the solidarity that a moment like this can also present. But let's take a listen to former U.S. President Barack Obama, who says that nationwide demonstrations over the killing of George Floyd are an opportunity for people to be awakened and to change America. It was Obama's first public comment on camera since the unrest gripping cities across the states.
In some ways, as tragic as these past few weeks have been, as difficult and scary and uncertain as they've also been an incredible opportunity for people to be awakened to some of these underlying trends. And they offer an opportunity for us to all work together to tackle them, to take them on, to change America and make it live up to its highest ideals. And part of what's made me so hopeful is the fact that so many young people have been galvanized and activated and motivated and mobilized. Because historically, so much of the progress that we've made in our society has been because of young people. I want you to know that you matter. I want you to know that your lives matter, that your dreams matter.
All right, so that's just the message then from the former U.S. President. Let me continue my conversation with Patrick Gaspard, who's with the Open Society Foundations. Patrick, you were speaking about lessons. It's a moment of solidarity locally today. The ANC has announced that the party, alongside its alliance partners, will now be hosting Black Fridays effectively in solidarity with this campaign. What does it mean to have global support for the Black Lives Matter movement?
Oh, it means the world. There are so many of us right now who are feeling acute pain, but who've also been feeling a great deal of isolation around these issues. I'm speaking to you not just as the head of a global philanthropy, not just as the former U.S. ambassador, but as a black man in America who's had his own encounters with the police in ways that stripped away the elements of my own citizenship. So there's a real pain, and it really is heartening when one looks up and sees the kind of resolutions that were passed in South Africa. When you see the head of the African Union, Moussa Faki, speaking out affirmatively about this issue, when you even see the Secretary General of the United Nations stepping forward and saying something is wrong in America, there's a rot here that's systemic that needs to be changed. We've had messages of solidarity from throughout the African continent, but we've also had mobilizations of solidarity, even while we all try to observe social distancing during COVID. It inspires us, makes us want to work harder, and also lifts up our determination to be in solidarity in the diaspora when our brothers and sisters on the continent are going through similar circumstances. Please maintain the pressure. President Obama, in the clip that you showed, talked about his optimism that he's feeling about the spirit of young people. Africa is the youngest continent there is. I am sorry that we put the burden of solving these problems on that generation. But the young Africans that I've mentioned throughout the continent are more than capable of taking this up and leading us into a much better future.
Do you think that the campaign, the movement, the protests right now have the full support of the American head of state?
Oh, absolutely not. The movement has anything but the full support. It has the hostility of the American head of state. Let's remember something, Cathy. So this is a president, this is a White House that's now coming out and saying, hey, you know, peaceful protest is okay, but we've got to do everything, even send in the military for the few people who are distracting from that and who are looting. That's just absolutely shameful when you consider that Donald Trump himself, both as a candidate and as president of the United States, denounced peaceful protesters. There's a young African-American man who was the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers football team. President Trump singled him out, dragged his name to the mud for his peaceful protest about police violence. He's done this time and again to those who've taken to the streets to have their voices heard. Donald Trump, as president, came in front of an order of police officers and told them that they needed to rough up anyone who was a suspect that they encountered in the daily course of their business. The police are public servants. We all are taxpayers. They are responsible to us. Just like the Lieutenant General of the SANDF in South Africa was outrageous when he came before Parliament and said that he doesn't respond to Parliament. When Donald Trump exhorts the police not to have a service relationship to the African American community, to all Americans, he is subverting the Constitution and he is diminishing his office.
All right, Patrick Gaspard, thank you so much for your time tonight on News at Prime. He, of course, is the president of the Open Societies Foundations, and many of you would remember him as the former U.S. ambassador to South Africa.